Story 1. The Locked Tower on Blue Ridge. It was late October when they put me on night rotation up near Blue Ridge. Leaves were mostly gone from the trees, and the air carried that quiet, sharp kind of cold that settles in your lungs before your mind can catch up. Most rangers didn't like being up there after dusk, and those of us who'd done it rarely talked about it. Folks said it was the wind or the silence that got to them, but it always felt like something more. I didn't buy into ghost stories. I believed in trespassers, meth labs, and mountain lions. But I also knew the woods didn't always play fair. My assignment that night was simple. Check on a decommissioned fire lookout tower near mile marker 73. The tower hadn't been used in years, 2 decades, maybe more. We kept it on the books because it was technically still federal property, but no one had keyed it in for a scheduled visit since before I joined the service. The only reason I was sent that night was because some hikers had reported a light flickering in the tower window earlier in the week. Probably just a reflection or a prank, but protocol's protocol. I parked the truck about half a mile from the base and made the rest of the way on foot. The trail was narrow, winding, and the forest pressed in close on both sides. No wind, no owls, just the crunch of my boots in dead leaves and the creak of old trees leaning into each other. My flashlight beam cut through the dark in slices, never quite reaching far enough to make me comfortable. Every so often I'd stop and listen, half hoping to hear something, half praying I wouldn't. The tower came into view like a silhouette someone forgot to erase. It stood maybe 40 feet high, wood blackened with age and moss, the metal bolts rusted to a dull red. The ladder leading up to the platform swayed gently even though there wasn't a breeze. It looked wrong against the stillness. I stood at the base for a long minute, just watching it. My breath fogged in front of me. I clicked the radio on. Station, this is Unit 3. Arrived at lookout. No visual activity. Proceeding with inspection. Only static came back, low and watery. I repeated myself twice, but got the same response. I chalked it up to the usual interference you get in these hills and strapped the radio back to my vest. The climb was worse than I remembered. Every rung groaned, and I half expected one to give way beneath my weight. When I reached the platform, I noticed the trapdoor was shut. That in itself wasn't strange, but what caught me off guard was the lock. A big old padlock clamped down tight on the inside latch. That wasn't supposed to be possible. I tried shining my light through the slats between the floorboards, but all I could make out was dust and shadow. I knocked once on the wood, more out of habit than expectation. That's when it knocked back. Just one knock, soft but clear. It came from directly below my feet. I froze. Every instinct told me to climb back down and radio it in later, but I stayed there, crouched, heart thumping in my ears. I knocked again, 2 knocks this time, quick and nervous. The reply was louder. Not knocking now, but something dragging, like wood scraping against wood, a chair being pulled across a floor. Then silence. I spoke into the trapdoor, unsure who I was even addressing. This is Ranger Hill. If you're inside, you're trespassing on federal property. I need you to identify yourself. Nothing. I pressed my ear to the wood. The dragging had stopped, but I could hear breathing, close and rhythmic, not rushed, not frightened, just steady. Listening to me as much as I was listening to it, I backed away slowly and tried the radio again. Unit 3 requesting backup at Blue Ridge Tower. Possible squatter. Padlock on the inside. Repeat. Padlock on the inside. The radio hissed like someone pouring water over hot rocks. I turned the volume down. I didn't want to drown out that breathing. A few minutes passed with no sound. Then the trapdoor creaked, just slightly, like someone leaning on it from the inside, not trying to open it, just testing. Then I heard something else, a whisper maybe, Not words, just the soft rasp of someone exhaling right up against the wood. I snapped, climbed down in a panic, nearly missed the last few rungs. My flashlight swung wild as I reached the ground and stumbled back, breathing like I'd run a mile. I didn't sleep that night. I filed the report the next day, but the higher-ups said the tower was sealed years ago, no one had keys, and the floor had collapsed partially from rot. They said the padlock couldn't have been inside. They said there was no evidence of anyone up there. But I know what I heard. I haven't been back since. I avoid that stretch of the forest altogether and take the long way around even during daylight. But sometimes, when I'm driving down from a late shift, I catch a shape out of the corner of my eye. Just a black tooth on the ridge, catching starlight. And for the briefest second, I swear I see something at the top. A figure behind the railing, not moving, not watching, just there. And when the wind's just right, I swear I hear it knock. Once, then silence. Story 2, Footprints by the Lake Shore. I first heard about Stillwater Pond from Ranger Ellis back when I was fresh out of academy. He was a quiet man, the kind who lets silence hang heavy in a room. One evening after a long shift, we were sipping gas station coffee on the overlook near mile marker 48, and I asked him about the places marked off limits on our maps, the ones with no trails leading to them. He just stared out over the hills and said, "Stillwater ain't for us." I laughed at the time, but he didn't. He just repeated it. Same slow voice, eyes far away. Stillwater ain't for us. A year later, he put in for early retirement and vanished into some little coal town up north. Nobody heard from him after that. We told hikers the pond was off limits because of sinkholes. That was the official story. But I'd never seen a report of anyone falling through the ground up there. No real geological risk. It was more that nobody liked going near it. Something about the air around that place just felt too still, too full of waiting. The woods were always quiet, but Stillwater was silent. You'd stop and realize you hadn't heard a bird or squirrel for miles. Just the sound of your own boots on wet leaves and that subtle pressure in your ears, like being underwater. My patrol rotation changed in late March. Spring hadn't quite broken through yet, so the trees still stood bare and crooked, like old men reaching at the sky. Fog rolled heavy that morning. I was doing a solo circuit in the northeast quadrant when the radio crackled to life. Dispatch asking me to verify a campfire sighting near the Stillwater perimeter. I thought it was a mistake. No one was supposed to be out there. Still, orders were orders. The trail narrowed the closer I got, then disappeared entirely. I cut the engine and parked near a patch of fern-covered rock. The moment the truck door shut, I noticed how quiet it was. Not just silent, vacant, like sound itself had been drained out. My footsteps felt muffled, and even my breath seemed to vanish before I could hear it. I walked down the slope toward the pond, the fog clinging low to the surface like a skin. No sign of smoke, no scent of wood or ash, just that strange, stagnant water sitting there like it had been holding its breath for a century. Then I saw them. Footprints. They were dark impressions in the mossy soil, glistening wet. Bare feet, large, way too large. Not monstrous, not clawed or grotesque, just wrong. Each toe was long, almost delicate, curved like fingers. I followed the trail with growing unease. They didn't meander like a hiker or wander like an animal. They moved with purpose, up the hill, across the clearing, around my truck. I felt my chest tighten. I turned slowly and saw them, prints wrapping around the vehicle in a wide, slow circle. Once, twice. Then they curved back, vanishing into the fog toward the waterline. I crouched low to inspect them. They weren't just prints. The impressions were deep, deeper than a man's weight should make, even in soft soil. And the shape was wrong in a way I couldn't see. The heel was too narrow, the arch too pronounced, like someone who'd never worn shoes in their life. And the spacing, each step was deliberate, measured, not cautious, intentional. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't rot or algae, it was faint, but sharp, like wet stone and something metallic. I stood quickly, trying to shake the unease, but the fog was thickening, curling like smoke around my ankles. I backed toward the truck, scanning the tree line. My radio hissed with static. I tried calling in, but all I got was garbled noise. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors without meaning to, and just sat there. Hands still on the wheel, eyes fixed on the pond. Something moved in the water. It wasn't a splash or a ripple. It was subtle, like someone slipping just below the surface. The fog lifted slightly and I saw it. Rings spreading outward from the center, soft and slow, like something large had submerged itself without sound. I watched for a long time, afraid to blink. Then the water stilled. Perfectly, like glass. I must have sat there for over an hour, just waiting, watching, hoping the prints would disappear or dry out, prove I'd imagined them. But they didn't. They just sat there in the mud, proof that something had walked out of the pond, circled me, then gone back in. At sunrise, the fog finally began to burn off, revealing more of the shoreline. That's when I saw the faint outline of something else, older, farther down the bank, like more prints, but softened by time and erosion. Faded paths, disappearing into the tree line, trails of something that came out often. I didn't get out again, not until dispatch finally reached me, said my radio had gone dead for 3 hours and they'd been about to send someone. I lied and said I'd seen nothing. No smoke, no hikers, nothing of concern. They didn't push me on it. A week later, I went back during the day, brought another ranger with me. We found no prints, no signs of recent disturbance, just still water, windless trees, and that eerie, persistent silence. My partner joked about the place being cursed. I didn't laugh. I started avoiding the northeast circuit after that. Swapped shifts, took more office time, made up excuses. But sometimes, at night, when I'm closing up the station or heading home along the gravel road near the base, I think I see something in the rear view, just a blur at the edge of the pond, a shape, a person maybe, standing knee-deep in the water, not moving, not waving, just watching. And sometimes, when it rains, I'll find prints again, not near the pond but near the station. Wet prints on dry pavement. No one else sees them. They fade fast, but they're there. I don't know what lives in Stillwater Pond. I don't want to know, but whatever it is, it remembers me, and it walks. Story 3. The Silent Campsite. I got the call just after sunrise. It was a mild October morning, the kind where the cold fog clings to the tree trunks and everything looks damp, even if it didn't rain. Dispatch told me a group of 4 campers hadn't checked out of their reserved site near Fern Hollow. No radio contact, no cell pings. The trailhead was locked up by rangers the night before, so unless they'd bushwhacked out, which was unlikely, they were still up there. I grabbed my kit, loaded into the utility truck, and made my way up the gravel switchbacks through the canopy. The sun was barely cutting through the trees when I reached the gate. I didn't feel anything strange at first, just quiet, too quiet. Not the kind of silence you notice when the woods are calm. This was the kind that presses in on you. No birds, no squirrel chatter, not even the distant groan of trees shifting in the wind. Just my own boots and breath. The campsite wasn't far off trail. It was a designated clearing near the ridge, mostly flat and framed by tall pines. I'd been there plenty of times over the years, usually to check permits or warn folks about fire hazards. It looked the same when I arrived, tents still pitched, one lantern flickering low near the picnic table. There was even a skillet on the campfire grate with half-burned bacon stuck to it, the edges curling like dried leaves. But no people, No packs, no boots, no signs of a struggle, just absence. 4 chairs arranged around the fire pit, each turned away from it, facing the dense tree line like they were waiting for something. All 4 pointed in the same direction, legs neatly squared on the pine needle floor. It looked intentional, like they'd all gotten up at once, calmly, and left. I called out their names from the logbook: Sam, Jill, Derek, and Louise. My voice sounded wrong in the space, too loud and hollow, like it echoed off something that wasn't there. Nothing answered, not even an owl. I walked the perimeter, looking for signs they'd wandered off, but there were no tracks, no snapped branches, no recent disturbance. Just the 4 tents, untouched. Zipped up, I unzipped one. Inside, there was a phone still plugged into a small solar charger. No signal, no blood, no signs of struggle, just stillness. Each tent was the same. Made beds, unclaimed gear, things left behind in the kind of way that says, "We'll be right back." But they hadn't come back. I radioed in, told dispatch what I found. They told me to gather the gear for evidence and wait for search and rescue to sweep the area. I was careful, tagged everything with notes. I took photos, but I left the chairs for last. I didn't like them. Something about them made me feel like I was being watched from the woods they faced. When I finally approached them, I noticed the grass underneath each one was matted down too neatly. Like they'd been in that position for a while. I picked them up one by one and stacked them at the edge of the site. Even touching them gave me the kind of prickling sensation you get when someone stares too long. I loaded the rest of the gear into the truck bed and sat in the cab for a while, trying to get warm. That's when I noticed something strange on the dash. My breath didn't fog the glass. The air had gone dead cold, but only outside the truck. Inside, it felt like the heat was up, even though I hadn't turned it on. I stepped out again and checked around. Still no sign of wildlife. No sign of the campers. I decided to take the gear back to the station myself. There was no point in standing around waiting for something that wouldn't show itself. The sun was higher now, and light spilled through the canopy in slow, dusty columns. But it didn't make me feel any better, just exposed. The drive back was quiet. I had the gear covered with a tarp in the truck bed, chairs included. It wasn't until I reached the ranger station that I noticed they were gone. Not all of it, just the chairs. I stopped in the lot and pulled the tarp back. Everything else was there, the tents, the cookware, even the folded sleeping bags. But the 4 chairs were missing. No sign of them having fallen out. No drag marks, no broken straps. Just gone. I checked the road behind me on foot, retraced the route for half a mile. Nothing. No plastic, no fabric, no signs of where they went. I asked dispatch if someone had come by while I was unloading. Nobody had. They watched me on the outside camera, said I parked, turned off the engine, and went inside. They didn't see anyone else. I didn't file that part of the report, just logged it as incomplete transfer. 2 days later, the search and rescue team found nothing. Dogs wouldn't track. The woods stayed silent. It was like the 4 of them stepped off the earth and took their shadows with them. Then last week, I was doing inventory in the equipment shed, and I saw something tucked behind the old salt bags. 4 folding chairs. Same model, same color. All folded neatly. Stacked in the exact same order I'd arranged them at the campsite. No one claimed to have brought them in. There were no work orders logged, no transfers. Just a sticky note on the top one with a timestamp. The same time I'd parked the truck that day. I haven't told anyone. I don't think I will. Sometimes I drive past Fern Hollow at dusk. I tell myself I won't stop, but I always do. And each time, I find myself looking toward the tree line, wondering what they were waiting for. And if it's still waiting, too. Story 4. The radio on Old Hollow Road. It was late September when the radio incident happened. One of those nights where the air feels thin and dry, and the trees look brittle enough to snap if the wind got brave enough. I was covering the late shift, just a supply run and a basic trail sweep through Sector 9, the part of the park that wraps around Old Hollow Road. We don't patrol it much anymore. The road's mostly closed to the public, marked unsafe due to erosion. But the real reason is that hikers avoid it. Locals too. Folks who've lived here their whole lives will take a 2-mile detour just to keep from passing it. There's stories, but nobody ever tells the same one twice. I didn't mind the assignment. I figured most of what we call creepy is just our brains reacting to quiet places. So when one of the old jeeps gave out near the bottom of the switchback, I wasn't too worried. It sputtered and stalled like it had taken a breath and just decided not to exhale again. I radioed dispatch and told them I'd wait for a tow unit. The signal was spotty, but the message got through. I was on my own until they could reach me. The woods were still. Not silent exactly, but holding their breath. I had the driver's door propped open, boots on the gravel, fingers tapping the steering wheel in the kind of rhythm that keeps you from feeling too alone. The sun had dipped just below the ridge, and the shadows stretched out wide across the trees like black cloth. I leaned back to grab my thermos when the radio crackled. At first I thought it was just static, maybe a wind-blown frequency catching a far-off transmission. Then it came through again, clearer, not on the park frequency, not even on the emergency band, just a voice, quiet, confidence, and it said my name, not just my name. It said it in the tone only my sister uses, a certain way of drawing out the first syllable like she's calling me to dinner. I froze. For a second I thought maybe the tow had arrived and someone was trying to find me, but there were no headlights, no sound of an engine. The voice came again over the radio, soft and patient. "Come on out here. We found something. It's what you've been looking for." I didn't know what that meant. I hadn't been looking for anything, not that I knew of. I grabbed the mic and asked who was transmitting, but the radio just hissed. Then the voice again, this time layered, one part through the speaker, the other from the woods. I turned off the cab light and stepped out into the dusk, flashlight in hand. I didn't shine it right away, just listened. There was a gentle scuffing sound, like something brushing against undergrowth, close, but not urgent. I switched on the beam and swept it across the road. Nothing. Then into the trees. And there, maybe 30 feet in, I caught a flicker of movement. Something crouched low, human-shaped, not animal. One hand held to its mouth like it was speaking into a small radio. The other was pressed against the trunk of a tree, steadying itself. The voice repeated the same line, now perfectly in sync between my hand held and the figure in the woods. "Come on out here. We found something. It's what you've been looking for." I backed into the jeep and killed the radio. Silence swallowed the clearing instantly. The only sound now was my own breath, sharp and uneven. A few minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe less. Then the radio powered back on. I hadn't touched it. The volume was turned low, but I could still hear the soft hissing. Then a different voice came through. Younger, uneven. It sounded like a recording played back, too slow. We waited. You didn't come. Then another voice. My voice, clipped, distorted, saying something I don't remember ever saying. "She's gone into the tree line." That chilled me. I hadn't said that, not ever, not in any log. But the voice on the radio, it was mine. Not just the words, but the rhythm, the breath, the weight. I shut it off again, yanked the power cable clean. This time, it stayed off. The sun was gone now, and the forest had taken on that strange blue-dark color that only happens in places far from people. I stayed in the cab, doors locked, flashlight off. The only light came from the faint glow of the tow truck's ETA timer on my GPS, still blinking uselessly, still showing no signal. Then I heard the radio again. Not in the cab. in the woods, farther now, but still clear, like someone was walking away, repeating my name in that drawn-out way, like a lure. I sat there in total darkness, counting my breaths, willing the headlights to appear, and eventually they did. Twin beams cutting through the fog like salvation. The tow truck rolled up slowly, gravel crunching under heavy tires. I stepped out and waved the driver down. He looked at me strangely, didn't say much, just asked if the vehicle would start. I said no. We loaded it up, and I climbed into the cab beside him. As we pulled away, I glanced back once. The forest was black behind us, swallowed by the curve of the ridge. But I swear I saw it, just for a second, a small red LED glow in the trees. A handheld radio light, blinking like a heartbeat. I didn't report the incident. Not the voices, not the figure, not even the radio malfunction. There's no room for things like that in the paperwork, but sometimes, late at night, I turn on my radio just to check. I'll scan through the channels slowly, waiting for something that isn't supposed to be there, and once, just once, I heard it again, my name, spoken like a memory I'd forgotten I had, followed by a second voice, one I haven't heard since I was a child, my father's voice, dead 10 years now, saying, "You should have come when we called." Story 5. The Cabin Without Windows. It was early spring when I found the cabin. Snow still clung in the deeper hollows and along the north faces of the ridge, but the creek trails had started to thaw, making the outer sections of the park passable again. I was doing a solo check of the southwest boundary, nothing too intense, just verifying landmarks, checking for new blowdowns, making sure the maps still matched the land. I've been with the Park Service almost 12 years, and that stretch of trail was one I knew like the lines in my palm. So when I saw a path I didn't recognize, I should have stopped, should have flagged it, marked it, and turned around. But curiosity has a way of whispering soft in your ear when the woods are quiet. The trail wasn't overgrown, which is what bothered me most. It looked maintained, like someone had swept away the deadfall, cleared out the bramble. Narrow, but walkable, fresh. I followed it down through a gully and across an old, rotted log bridge that didn't grow nearly as much as it should have. Everything around me felt damp and slow, the kind of quiet you only get in a forest that hasn't been touched in a long, long time. The air smelled like moss and turned to earth, and the trees were too close together, as if they'd been planted to watch the path. About half a mile in, the trail widened into a small hollow, and there it was, a cabin, just sitting there like it had always been there, square, upright, not quite falling in, but old. What stopped me cold was that there were no windows, not boarded up, none at all, just flat, weathered siding and a single door, warped and grey like driftwood. No chimney, no porch, nothing to catch the eye beyond its wrongness. I stood there staring at it, my boots rooted in wet leaves. I don't know how long I stood there before I heard the noise from inside. It was subtle at first, wood dragging against wood, like someone pulling a chair across a floor in slow, deliberate inches. Then nothing. Then the sound again, closer to the door this time. I called out, identifying myself like protocol required. No answer. The door didn't move, but something behind it shifted. I stepped forward, hand resting on the latch of my belt radio. "Is anyone inside?" I asked. Still no reply. I circled the structure, no back entrance, no ventilation, no gaps between boards. Just a box in the woods, sealed tight. I should have left, should have marked the coordinates and radioed it in. But something in me, the same thing that made me take that unknown trail, made me stay. I stepped to the front again and placed my hand on the door. It opened too easily. No creak, no weight behind it. It just gave way, like someone had pulled it open from the other side a moment before I touched it. I expected dust, cobwebs, maybe even a raccoon. But there was nothing. No furniture, no floorboards. Just smooth, dark planks and that smell. Wet wood and something older beneath it. Like books that had rotted underground. The walls were bare but not untouched. They felt wrong to look at. Like the grain in the wood moved if you didn't watch it directly. The dragging sound was gone. I stepped in, just 1 foot. The temperature dropped like I'd walked into a cave. My skin prickled, something deep in my head. A pressure like being submerged. I stood perfectly still, flashlight gripped tight. The beam flicked a little, caught on dust motes that weren't there, and then I realized something that made me stagger back. There was no echo. My breath, my steps, even the wind outside. None of it made sound inside the cabin. It was like the walls swallowed it whole. I backed out slowly, never turning from the doorway. When I finally stepped away and the door shut behind me with a quiet click, I almost sobbed with relief. I marked the trailhead as best I could and headed back, trying to log it on my handheld GPS, but the device kept losing signal. I chalked it up to the terrain. The forest was still too quiet. I stayed on the trail, the one I knew, eyes locked ahead. I didn't look back, but about 20 minutes into the hike, I realized something was wrong. The path curved left around a rock I recognized, but when I rounded the bend, the cabin was there again. Same clearing, same door. This time, it was open. I froze. My first thought was that I'd somehow gotten turned around, walked a loop without realizing it, but I hadn't strayed. I checked the slope of the ridge, the direction of the creek, even the light. I knew the forest too well to have made that mistake, but the cabin was there, unchanged, and it was waiting. My compass spun in slow circles. The GPS refused to boot. The trail behind me looked identical in every direction. I tried to radio in, just static. I stared into the open doorway, and for one awful moment, I thought I saw something inside. Not a shape, but a suggestion. A subtle shift in the light, like a figure had just stepped aside. I turned and ran, not calmly, not with purpose. Just full flight, crashing through brush, ignoring the trail, branches clawing at my arms, lungs burning. I didn't stop until I hit the gravel service road. I don't remember how I got there. 1 minute the trees were choking me. The next I was blinking in the harsh grey light of the open sky. I found the main trail 20 minutes later. No sign of the offshoot, no strange bridge, no hollow. The forest had reset itself. When I got back to the station, I didn't log it as an encounter, just marked trail inspection complete. But I left the coordinates blank. That night, I dreamed I was standing in front of the cabin again. The door was open. My boot was already inside. I could hear the scraping sound, louder now, closer, and someone whispered my name. Not loud, not threatening, just like a reminder, like I'd forgotten something, like I belonged there. I still dream about it sometimes. And the worst part is, in the dream, I don't want to leave. Story 6. Voices Beneath the Gorge. I was 4 years into the job when I got the call about the laughter echoing through tall, hollow gorge. The trail down there's been closed off since the late 90s, when a rock slide took out a suspension bridge and stranded a couple hikers overnight. They were fine, shaken up but alive. But ever since then, the park labeled the lower gorge trail unsafe after dark. Not that it stops people. Poachers still sneak down there looking for ginseng. Teenagers slip through looking for a place to drink without their parents finding out. Most of the time, they scare easily when they hear a ranger's boot crunch behind them. They run off, we log it, and that's the end. That night, I was alone on rotation. We'd had a dry spell, so the risk of rockfall was low, and the temperature had dipped enough to keep most campers in their tents. I figured it'd be a quiet patrol, I took the gravel road up the West Ridge, parked near the old Fire Road gate, and made the rest of the way down to the gorge on foot. It was close to 9 p.m. by then, and the sky had that low purple haze the mountains get in late spring, right before the stars start punching through. I didn't hear the voices right away. It started with a single laugh, soft, carried on the wind, bouncing off the gorge walls in a way that made it hard to place. I stopped and listened. Another laugh followed, then a second voice, and a third. They didn't panic. They weren't yelling or calling for help. It was more like a campfire conversation, easy, familiar, with that strange undertone of people enjoying each other in the dark. I called out, expecting a rustle or the sound of someone getting spooked and running, but there was nothing. Just another soft burst of laughter, farther ahead now. I followed it, flashlight sweeping across dead ferns and old moss-covered stones. The deeper I went into the gorge, the colder the air became, not like the sun had gone down, but like the ground itself was holding on to something it shouldn't. My breath started fogging, and the light of my beams seemed to lose strength the closer I got to the river. The voices kept ahead of me, never urgent. Always just around the next bend, like a group that knew where they were going and didn't care whether I followed. What started as casual talking began to shift though. The laughter grew thinner, less human. The speech started sounding like old radio static, cadences without language, too quick to follow but too steady to be natural. Then I reached the riverbank. The Little Raven River is usually shallow by that point, ankle deep and slow. But that night, it looked darker, deeper, like it had taken on weight. The flashlight flicked once, then steadied, beam cutting across the water like a blade. I saw nothing at first, just smooth black stones and the occasional glimmer of submerged limbs from fallen trees. And then I heard them. Not around me, beneath. The voices were under the river. I stepped closer, and I swear it was like I'd cracked open the lid of something. Dozens of murmurs floated up from the stone bed, not distorted by the water, but somehow clear and direct, whispers spoken just below the surface. Not one voice. Many, men and women, some young, some old. None of them are urgent, all of them are waiting. I knelt, shined my light into the river, and I saw them. Faces, pressed just beneath the current like they were trapped beneath ice. Pale, washed-out eyes staring up with soft, unreadable expressions. They weren't moving, not floating, just there, watching, some with mouths half open, like they were still speaking. The longer I looked, the more appeared, until it felt like the whole river was made of them, layer upon layer, as though the stone beneath the water had become transparent, revealing whatever had been buried in its memory. My flashlight began to dim. I stood, heart knocking in my throat, and backed away from the bank. The voices swelled slightly, then quieted again, still whispering, still speaking to each other, not to me. That's when I realized what was wrong with the sound. There was no echo, not anymore. No canyon bounce, no rock reflection. It was like the voices had turned inward, pulling everything into themselves. My own breathing felt muffled. My boots made no sound in the dirt. I tried the radio, static. The battery meter read full, but the screen flickered and went black. The gorge had sealed itself. I turned and walked fast, too fast, back up the trail. I didn't run, not yet, but my shoulders were tense like a fist, waiting. As I moved, the whispers followed. Not behind me, not above, but under, always under. Like the river was still beneath my feet, flowing through the ground, threading itself through every root and stone. About halfway up, I passed a boulder I didn't recognize. Flat-topped, about waist-high. There was something scratched into the side, deep lines worn with age. I slowed and ran my fingers across the groove. It looked like a tally. No, several tallies. Rows of them. Names, maybe, or marks. I didn't stop long enough to be sure. When I finally reached the fire road, the sounds stopped. All of them. It was as if the forest had rebooted. A distant owl called. The wind stirred the branches. My radio clicked back to life with a burst of garbled chatter, just enough to let me know I was back on the grid. I looked behind me, nothing but the gorge, silent in the moonlight. I didn't write it up. Not really. Just logged, investigated suspected trespassers, no contact made. I told myself it was nothing. Acoustics, nerves, some buried memory rising up from a story I heard when I was young. But it never quite sat right. Sometimes I walk the ridge trail that overlooks the gorge, especially after heavy rain. The river always looks the same, slow, black, harmless. But every once in a while, if I stand real still, I swear I can hear the sound of laughter carried up in the wind. Not loud, not sharp, just there, like someone remembering something I forgot. Story 7. The Lantern in the Pines. The first call about the light came in from a couple of hunters just before the season ended. They said they'd seen a lantern moving through the pines near the southern ridge. Thought it was another group cutting through without permits. But when they tried to flag the person down, the light just vanished. No sound, no trail, just there 1 second and gone the next. I chalked it up to fog and nerves. Happens a lot more than folks admit in the hills. You see what you expect to see until the forest reminds you it's in charge. The second report came from a maintenance guy working the firebreak. He didn't use the word lantern, but he described a steady light swaying like it was being carried. Said it followed him along the ridge, always just far enough ahead that he couldn't make out a figure. He quit that week. Didn't give a reason. Just left his badge and keys on the front desk with a note that said, "I'm done walking in circles." That's what made me go. It was late fall, the kind of cold where the air feels thin and dry in your lungs, and every step through leaves sounds too loud. The forest gets skeletal around then, branches stripped bare, sounds carrying farther than they should. I set out just before dusk, hoping to reach the ridge before full dark. I didn't tell anyone I was heading out. Just wrote "Light check, South Ridge" on the log sheet and went. By the time I reached the pines, the sun had bled out behind the mountains, and the forest had gone that particular shade of blue that always feels like it's holding its breath. I stopped to scan the tree line. Nothing yet. Just the wind scraping through branches like dry hands. Then I saw it. A light. Not a flashlight, warmer than that. Amber and low. It bobbed slowly between the trees about 30 yards ahead, swaying in a rhythm too steady to be random. It looked exactly like an old kerosene lantern. I couldn't see who held it, just the light and the way it seemed to paint the trees with soft fire. I called out, "Ranger service, if you're lost, I can help." The words felt too sharp in the quiet. The lantern stopped, hovered, then blinked out. No sound, no rustle. Just gone. The forest sealed shut again. I held my breath for a beat, flashlight gripped tight. Then, 30 yards further into the woods, the lantern reappeared, same motion, same warmth. But moving now, faster, cutting deeper into the trees. I followed, not quickly. I kept my steps careful, my breath slow. The light weaved through the trees like it knew where it was going. Every time I got close, it disappeared, only to blink back on, deeper in, always deeper, like it was leading me, or testing how far I'd go before I turned back. I should have turned back. After the 4th time it vanished. I paused. The forest was darker now. The trail I'd followed had turned to soft earth and thick pine needles. I checked my bearings. My compass spun lazily in every direction. Useless. I scanned the woods again. The lantern flared back into view about 15 yards away. Closer this time. Dead still. Not swaying. Just waiting. Something in me refused to take another step. I stood there for a long moment, heartbeat loud in my ears, then I turned around and froze. Behind me, closer than the first, another lantern glowed, low to the ground, not moving. My breath caught. I hadn't passed anyone. There was no time, no angle, no place they could have come from. I was sure of that. The forest around me pressed in like a closed fist, the pines whispering too low to understand. My flashlight flickered. I turned in a slow circle. There were no sounds. None. The usual groan of limbs in the wind, the skitter of leaves. Gone. My boots didn't even crunch. It was like standing inside a sealed jar. Then I heard something. Not from the lanterns, but from the trees between them. Breathing, soft, deliberate. Someone inhaling, then exhaling slowly. Not out of fear, not out of effort, just existing. I didn't move. I didn't shine my light toward it. I didn't want to see. The front lantern pulsed once, bright, then low, like a heartbeat. I backed away slowly, careful not to turn my back to either light. My radio crackled once, just static, then went silent again. I walked until the lanterns slipped out of view. When I finally reached the fire road again, I looked behind me. Only the night stared back. I didn't report it, not really, just marked no contact, trail clear. That part wasn't a lie. There wasn't anyone to report. But ever since that night, I've seen the lantern again, always near the edge of the woods, always when I'm alone, sometimes just a flicker between the trees, other times steady and bright, as if it's waiting for me to notice. And I've learned something. It never shows up when you're looking for it, only when you think you've finally left it behind. Story 8. The Screams from Bear Hollow. They say Bear Hollow got its name from the sound that comes out of it some nights. It's not an official name, not on any ranger maps or signage, but everyone in town calls it that. The old-timers used to whisper about it after too much shine, claiming it wasn't bears at all that earned the place its name. Something older, they'd say, something that doesn't show up in hunting guides or naturalist handbooks. I didn't put much stock in those stories. Most of this job is keeping people calm and the trails clean. Animals make weird sounds. Wind can twist a fox's scream into something biblical if it hits the right shape of rock. Still, when the radio lit up with 3 separate calls from cabins near the ravine reporting screams like a woman being murdered, I grabbed my rifle and headed out. It was past midnight when I reached the Bear Hollow trailhead. No moon. Cloud cover thick enough to choke out the stars. I parked the truck, stepped out into that heavy kind of silence that seems to push back when you breathe. The only light came from my headlamp and the occasional flicker of my flashlight beam sweeping the trunks. The trail was narrow, slick with damp moss. The deeper I went, the more I felt the temperature drop. Not in a way I could explain by elevation. It felt wrong, artificial, like someone had sucked all the warmth from the earth. I heard the first scream about 20 minutes in. It came from down in the ravine, a drawn-out wail that cracked halfway through like vocal cords stretched too far. I froze. It wasn't an animal. I know what coyotes, bobcats, even panicked elk sound like. This was none of those. It sounded human. I called out, "Ranger service, anyone injured?" And waited. Nothing. The scream didn't repeat, but my skin had already started to crawl. I moved forward, slower now, rifle unslung but down at my side. The trail curved sharply at the bluff, opening up to a narrow overlook above the hollow. Below, the trees thickened, and the path dropped steeply in switchbacks. I started down, boots careful on the slick stone. Halfway to the hollow floor, the scream came again, Closer this time, but not ahead. Above, it echoed strangely as though it had been sucked into the canopy and twisted there, repeating back through the trees like something bouncing between mirrors. I stopped, listened. Branches shifted above me, not swaying with the wind but moving, deliberate, like something was crawling through them. Heavy, I raised the beam of my flashlight, swept the upper branches. Nothing, but the rustling continued, slow and rhythmic, tracing a wide circle overhead like a predator testing its angle. I radioed in, static chirping back at me like it was underwater. I gave my location anyway, voice low, then shut it off. The signal wouldn't hold out this far, and I didn't want to draw any more attention than necessary. Reaching the hollow floor, I expected to feel some kind of relief. I didn't. The air felt thin, used up. I scanned the clearing. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Just old leaves, half-buried stones, and the faint smell of rot. Earthy, but not fresh. Then silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that feels like it's listening. That's when I noticed the canopy above me wasn't still anymore. It was rippling, branches shifting, leaves trembling, not like wind, but as if something was weaving through them on all fours. Every so often, I'd catch the flicker of a branch bending where nothing visible touched it. Whatever it was big. I backed toward a boulder, kept the rifle up. Still no sound, no scream, no sight of movement on the ground. And then, just as suddenly as it had gone quiet, the screams started again. But this time, they weren't ahead of me, they were behind, and they were getting closer. I turned, expecting to see someone staggering through the brush, hurt, disoriented, whatever. But the woods were empty, still. The scream echoed again, closer now, then another, and another, each one from a different direction, same pitch, same length, like something copying the sound over and over, layering it. I didn't wait to see what came next. I backed up the trail, rifle raised, flashlight sweeping wildly. The screams kept pace with me, always a little too far off to spot, but never fading completely. I reached the ridgeline and half-jogged the switchbacks back up, my breath loud in my ears. Then the worst thing happened. The screaming stopped. No sound at all. Not even my footfalls seemed to echo anymore. The forest around me was a tomb. And then, right above me, something landed in the branches. Loud, heavy, not a fall, a landing. It moved across the canopy with the crack of wood giving under weight, not breaking but bending, like it knew just how much pressure each limb could take. I didn't dare look up again. I ran. I didn't think so. Didn't breathe. Just pushed through until I saw the truck's pale reflection in my flashlight. I jumped in, slammed the door, locked it. Sat there for a full minute, hands shaking on the wheel. Then the scream came again, from the woods behind me, and another, and another. I started the engine and drove like hell. When I reached the station, I didn't log the event the way I should have. Just wrote investigated sound report, area secure. But those screams, they didn't stop. That night, as I sat in my bunk trying to convince myself it had all been nerves, I heard them again, faint, far off, but following the wind all the way up to the station. They echoed through the trees like they'd taken root, and I've heard them more than once since. Always from the south, always after midnight, and every time they sound a little closer.